transfer grants. But one of the things that I think to touch upon that I wanted to talk about a little bit is the non-dilutive state programs. I can speak to New Jersey because that's the one that I use, but I feel that there are others that in Connecticut, in Philadelphia, with Ben Franklin, there's other options depending on state regulations, and the states are jockeying for some of these companies. So the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, NJEDA, actually has an interesting program that's called the Tax Certificate Transfer Program, where you sell your net operating losses and you get credit, and it's 80% of the value. That's cash coming in. Clearly, for a company that's starting out, that's doing R&D, that needs to do the trials that Jennifer was just speaking of, you can raise your initial fund and then you get stuck in what we call the valley of death, and you don't have any funding to get to that next round. And this kind of ties you over. And not only that, is if I'm an angel, this is non-dilutive. So it's a way to leverage without debt your financing strategy as an entrepreneur. So I think as angels, this is something that is powerful for us when we talk about return on investment. Just some quick numbers. The allocations haven't changed since 2008. This is NJEDA data, so they had $60 million available. And if we look at the amount of awards, I mean, the average award in 2012, I don't have 2013 data, but I'm pretty sure it's similar, is almost $1 million. So we're talking large numbers. Obviously, that's what we need in life sciences. And we'll talk a little bit later about the large dollars can bring large returns. So I think that this is a powerful but unique option within the life science sector.
So I think those of us that have made life science investments, and I'd be curious, maybe we could just raise hands. How many people in this room have actually made some life science investments? Okay, so a lot. So one of the things that I know I found most daunting is the arc of investment that's needed for these kinds of companies. And, you know, part of the answer, as Bill indicated and we've already alluded to, is picking the subsectors that maybe are the best and that are most manageable. But part of it as well, I think, is to really understand what the capital requirements are over time so that you can really be prepared and have a funding strategy. Now, hopefully the entrepreneur knows for their particular area what that is, but I know, having worked now with a number of life science companies, I don't think we can rely on the entrepreneur to always know, and we need to really prepare ourselves better. I think, you know, all of us have probably been in that position. So what I'd like to do is ask Jennifer if she'll sort of expand on that topic of the capital requirements for these companies.
Okay, so this is a broad generalization, but it's generally true. Typically, you know, an angel comes in, they maybe have a prototype, they're looking to move it into the clinic. And so you're coming in and, you know, you want a valuation under $5 million, and you plan on being in that investment for about 2 to 4 years. As the product goes through and you're moving more into the broader trials that the FDA might require, then you need to raise an additional, you know, $25, $30 million. So this is the angel investment slide, and this is typically where the venture capitalists come in. You're looking for that type of demonstration of clinical impact. So they've got their CE mark approval, they're conducting the national marketing trials, trying to get the physicians to adopt the device. They're moving into the clinic and developing that data. And now when they're on the market, they're trying to build the value of the franchise, really demonstrate continuous revenue growth and product sales. And typically these companies are public. They're accessing the public market and obtaining their capital there. And with that, I will ask.
Ashley, you get to
do the next one.
Yeah. You know, one of the key issues, again, and this is true regardless of sector, is exit. I mean, I always laugh because when we see screenings of new entrepreneurs for Golden Seeds, quite often they barely mention exit. They haven't, in some cases, even really given a lot of thought to exit. Whereas we as investors kind of laser focus on exit almost from the beginning. And so clearly in this sector, as in others, there's some unique aspects to exit. And I think, you know, one of the things we thought we would cover is both the drivers of exit in this particular sector. And Jennifer's going to do that. And then when she's done with that, we're going to ask Gina to actually talk about valuations and how when you exit has a pretty significant impact on valuations. So.
This is the area we're all keenly. Your biggest exit value is driven when you can identify a device that changes clinical practice. You can demonstrate clear, cost-effective savings and improve patient outcomes. When you do that, you have your home run. And it's really something, it's not an incremental improvement, you know, now this gadget has this new feature. It's really introducing something into a sector where you are changing your clinical practice. And when you do that, that's when you get your biggest valuations and your best exits and your earliest exits. And so when you look at an exit, you're like, what is the type of acquire? What is what are you trying to achieve and what are their objectives? So when typically if you have a public company and they've established sales volume, they've established the value of their franchise, they get pretty big, you know, they get acquired by the major distributors, and they're looking at it in terms of revenue growth. Here's a nice product, I can acquire it and add to my revenue sales. For the angel, you're looking for a different type of acquirer. You want to exit early, and typically you have limited clinical data. You may have no product sales. So the type of exit that an angel is looking for is you're really looking for a business that is, they're protecting a market sector, or they want the IP. They really are they're acquiring the company because it has strategic value to their business. And many times, in this case, the company is in a better negotiating position if it has cash on hand. So there's a really direct correlation for angel-backed companies and their exit if the company has some cash on hand and can negotiate, you know, those terms. If they're running on fumes, you know, they don't have the negotiating power. And so that's a very common feature for the valuation. The flip side of that is if, you know, sometimes you'll get huge valuations with no sales if you really select a technology that is very transformative. So that's where you can get higher valuations earlier for angels.
So our question, kind of wrapping everything up, and I think what everybody's so interested in is how much money can we make, right? I mean, what is the value, and when do we need to get out, you know, kind of following on what Jennifer just said. And when we were talking about this, we intuitively know that, okay, well, if you get past certain milestones, the company should have a different valuation. So if you pass, you know, the FDA, you should have a different valuation. And Jennifer and I had met and we were talking about this, and I said, well, maybe we should find some data on that. And lo and behold, 2 days later, Silicon Valley Bank published some data about the state of the industry in 2014. So I kind of went back and said, okay, well, intuitively, I know that's true. So is it really? And what we found was that the big question is, do you need FDA approval to exit? And there is an it depends answer. Obviously, we talked about the trade-offs a little bit between the CE mark and the FDA approval and no approval, and it really does depend on the type of acquirer. But one of the things we found from the data is there's this barbell where you can have a faster exit, and usually that's about $30 million. Now remember, we're talking millions, but we're talking billion-dollar markets here. So it seems like large numbers, but you know, that is pretty typical. If you have a slower growth path where you need to do more trials, or you need that extra round because you had CE approval and you need that FDA approval, then it becomes a 10-year exit plan, and you wind up with $60 million in capital. So I think as an angel, we need to be cognizant of where we are on the spectrum and when we want to exit. And the other thing I would point out here is that there is something to be said about understanding a little bit of what happens after FDA approval and you're going into commercialization, and how do you calculate that value increase. And sometimes it's not worth the amount of money that you have to put in to get the adoption, because that's one of the things that's really difficult. We were talking about that earlier on, that changing behavior after you have this great new product is probably the hardest thing. So, we talk about the technology, we talk about the science, but the changing of the behavior sometimes is the biggest challenge in the life science sector. People don't want to change what they're doing if it's working. Why do I have to use something new? So there's